Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, our mini-STEMposium to support teachers in the field. This is the 7th of 18 webinars we are hosting. This session has 489 people registered. My name is Ken Heydrich, and I am the National STEM Manager for Accelerate Learning. I'll be your host today for an incredible afternoon of learning. I've been in K-16 education for over 30 years. Connecting with educators in the field, like today, is the best part of my job. Thank you for being here. We have lined up some exceptional talent from around the country for these mini-STEMposiums. This week, we are offering 6 sessions during the afternoon. We also will host 6 sessions during July 14 through 16. The link to the schedule is found in the chat window. Some of our national superstars include Dr. Roger Bybee, who's presenting today, and Peter McLaren, David Crother, Rita McDonald, Oki Lee, Larry Plank, and Kelly Price Coley. We also have some local trailblazers from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including Shane Woods, Linda Cook, and Malachi Eubank. In addition, we also have some of our best presenters from Accelerate Learning. As you know, these are challenging times. Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes wants to support our hardworking teachers by offering these sessions of high-quality professional learning. Nothing in return. We are just trying to provide some meaningful professional experiences, free. We are trying to take your mind off the pandemic for a moment. Please note that the participation of our major invited speakers does not necessarily mean an endorsement of products developed by Accelerate Learning. We are in challenging times. The speakers, along with me and my colleagues, are here to provide a rich learning experience so that teachers can take back with them some useful information and strategies to their students. We are all in this together. Before we begin, let me share some procedural aspects to this webinar. As you know, we are using Zoom, which has a number of interactive features. Please look at your sound and video controls found at the bottom, left side of your screen. The sound should be muted. Your audio should have a red diagonal line through it. If you choose to display your video, please be constantly aware of what you are broadcasting. We also recommend that you use the speaker view on your video display found in the top right corner. Let's try one feature now called polling. Let me release a quick poll to see who we have participating with us today. Go ahead and let's take 20 seconds and please mark what your background is. Okay, we have about 80%, a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great, thank you. We've got 90% participation. So here are the results of the participants in this. It looks like the elementary teachers are in first place, most pre-K-8, pre-K-5, and 6-8. And we also have a number of district administrators and higher ed and other people. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to hear from Dr. Roger Bybee. We also will be using chat feature today for your comments and questions. This window is being monitored by STEMscope staff, and you'll be able to respond when necessary. We also will be using a Zoom function called breakout rooms. Our presenter will be able to randomly put people in smaller rooms for a discussion. Okay, that's it for the procedures. Today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Roger Bybee present today. I've known Dr. Bybee for probably 20 years. He is the exemplary educator. He was the executive director for BSCS, the Biological Sciences Curriculum Study, for I think 17 years. He is the author of the 5E instructional model, which is used worldwide and it is the model that STEMscopes uses. He was also the architect of the National Science Education Standards, which came out in 1996. It was the precursor to the NGSS that we currently use. He also was the chair for the International Science Assessments called PISA for about 6 years. He has over 10 active books that are selling primarily through NSTA and other means. He has written numerous papers and done countless presentations. And one of the most important things or recognitions I think he has received was from NSTA. In 2007, he received the highest honor from NSTA. It's called the Carlton Award, and it's the highest honor that we give any one of our members providing services to teachers in the country. So, Dr. Bybee, we are very grateful that you are here with us today. It is all yours.
Well, thank you, Ken. Let me make a couple of comments before I go in and review the agenda. First of all, I express my appreciation for all of the individuals attending. The gift of your time to listen to some of my ideas is very deeply appreciated. I also extend my appreciation to the members of Accelerated Learning who are monitoring the chat and keeping me focused throughout this, and especially the continued support that Ken Heydrich has provided. Let me give you a context before getting into some of the other issues of the agenda. I have paid attention to STEM for a number of years, and a concern that I have that I'm trying to basically overcome is, in many, many cases, STEM is a slogan used by individuals to represent kind of anything that the individual has in mind, and may not be bad, but it has a wide use. I am particularly interested, and you'll see this idea developed through the presentation today, of trying to see what we can do as a STEM education community to move beyond the slogan of STEM and see how we can incorporate STEM as an integral component in education systems. Nobody would have to talk about, well, mathematics is a slogan. How can we integrate it into school systems? Or even for that matter, STEM or technology. How do we take this new and innovative idea, STEM, and move it from something that people use in a very broad variety of ways to something that is, in fact, some component of schools that will be around for a long time. So my agenda today is to try and clarify the STEM acronym and at least allude to, as I've already done, its diverse uses. We're going to look at the challenges and opportunities, and also, by the way, get some feedback from you on that. We're going to look at or recognize the connections that STEM may have with your state standards, and then present some strategies to help you implement STEM reforms. That would be the final kind of segment of the presentation. So, Ken, do you want to go to the next slide? The origins of the acronym. STEM probably originated at the National Science Foundation, and I wasn't there, but I could imagine a discussion that went something like this. Well, let's have science, math, engineering, and technology. And somebody said, that sounds like SMET, and that's kind of like smut. And I don't think that's a good idea for a federal agency. And so somebody else said, well, okay, let's do math, engineering, technology, and science. That's METS. And somebody reminded them, well, that's kind of like a National League baseball team in New York. Probably not a good idea. And so they came up with STEM, and immediately all of the botanists were really happy, and the people who were interested in watches in those days, there was a STEM, and of course all of the wine drinkers went, oh great, STEM, I get it, it's the part of my wine glass. And so the acronym STEM caught on. As the National Science Foundation intended probably to use STEM, just had to do a way of economizing a statement. Instead of every time you meant something about science, technology, engineering, and math, just say STEM. So we can be interested in STEM careers, for example, or STEM programs or STEM instructional materials, and it's a very economic way to convey that idea. What has happened, and that I've alluded to, is that there are multiple uses and references for STEM. Individual programs. Somebody has a robotics program and referred to it as STEM. There is even, I don't know if it's still around, but for a little while, for those of you from Arizona, Flagstaff was a STEM city. There's STEM within school programs. So what does it really mean? The reference to STEM is oftentimes actually connected to what the individual using the acronym means. And I think we can get beyond that and bring some clarity. And the limits and possibilities, I would list three actually in each category of limits and possibilities for us to think about. First of all, the limits. Embedded in what I've said so far, the limit is the ambiguity of what exactly does STEM refer to? Is it a program? Is it a school? What's the boundaries, if you will, of what it alludes to? Second is the obvious that I've already mentioned. It's inconsistent. It has an inconsistent use and thus application and so on. Finally, across the country, it has an incomplete incorporation of the four key disciplines. Somebody can really mean, we're going to talk about science careers, and they say STEM, and in fact, they mean science, or technology, or engineering, or mathematics, and or combinations of those. Well, we're going to do science and math, etc. So those are some of the, I think, limiting factors that we need to think about and address. On the possibilities side, there's a very clear need for a variation of instructional materials if we locate this in the K-12 continuum in school districts. And STEM provides that opportunity. It provides an opportunity to use different contexts, and I'll give you some examples of those. Right now, the most immediate one is the obvious one of COVID-19. How can we address it, and so on. I'll come back and use that as an example later. And one of the very positive things about STEM is it has a high level of political support. And in part, probably because of the ambiguity, but nonetheless, it has a high level of political support, and that really can open doors for us to make it a very viable component of education systems. Let's take a minute, actually, I think 5 minutes, and go to the breakout room and discuss and come up with very brief statements of how would, answering the question, how would you describe the purpose of STEM education? Or purposes, it could be plural. But how would you describe the purposes of STEM education? Okay, let's go to the breakout room. And I think you will have been assigned one, and engage in that discussion. By the way, some of the accelerated learning individuals will help monitor and coordinate discussions within the breakout rooms.
Okay, Roger, I'm going to get 25 rooms. We'll have 5 or 6 people in each room.
Great.
That sound good? Okay, you all will
That sounds good.
You will all be invited to a room. Please go to that room and have a discussion. How would you describe the purpose of STEM education? Roger, they're coming back from the rooms now.
So do we have from the accelerated learning team just a few comments? I have a couple from the breakout room that I participated, or I actually listened in. Some of the ideas or the purposes that were expressed.
Roger, we talked in our breakout room about the integrated portion of STEM and what it looked like, that it wasn't just a science class. It wasn't just a math class. It was that integrated portion, and how the students loved to actually learn from being active.
So, okay, good. One issue then is integration and kind of how you do that. I'll give you a response, right, kind of a quick one. In the room that I was in, people mentioned things like problem-based learning or project-based or place-based. I added the place-based, but those are ways that I use the term, they naturally integrate the disciplines. Once you get into the study, the project, the problem, or something such as that, then those, in order to understand the situation, that it kind of naturally integrates the disciplines for you. You pick the right problem, project, or place. So do we have another kind of summary or statement from another one of the breakout rooms?
Roger, I was in room 15, and we talked about how it was just active learning and the relevance of education and applying it to real life situations and being able to solve those problems.
Absolutely. You're going to hear me say later, I'm going to pick up on the words you just used, live situations. Individuals at different ages confront life situations, and it requires them to have the competencies to solve and to think about those situations. Many, not all, but many of the situations that we experience in this day and age in our culture and our society have to do with STEM disciplines singly and together. So that's a very good first step in the understanding the purposes of STEM education. We have comments from one other, or a summary from one other of the breakout rooms.
Roger, this is Pam, and we have some coming through in the chat as well. So I'll just briefly summarize some of those comments.
Sure.
STEM is getting students actively learning, seeing the relevance of education so that they can apply it to real life situations. There's a practicality to STEM. It involves critical thinking, integrating the STEM all together, learning through failure, learning from what did not work as much as from what did, everyday application of critical thinking and problem solving, seamless infusion of all subject areas, also combining the 4 C's of 21st century learning with STEM, combining skills from different areas to problem solve, create, something that addresses a need. Lots and lots of very relevant comments in the chat.
Oh yeah. So let's proceed on, and I will propose 3 major categories of the purposes of STEM education. Many of these can easily, you should. Now, one of the things I would note for you, just in listening, like Pam's summary and the summary from the other 2 breakout rooms and so on, many of the comments are, and no surprise, we have a majority of individuals participating today are classroom teachers. And so to hear things like connections to language arts and so on, absolutely. But how do we do it? So let's step back and look at 3 purposes that can be translated to some of the individual purposes that we heard. The first is a STEM literate society. This is something to understand what all citizens should be able to do, and what is it that they should know and understand, and I'll list those in a second. The second, and we heard reference to this, a deep technical workforce. Think of the couple people mentioned 21st century skills, that type of, so think of that as the category of 21st century workforce. And an advanced research and development workforce, that's the in particular category of individuals who are going to major in science, major in engineering, major in mathematics, apply technology, and so on. So we want to get those categories, and there are variations that have a long history within the disciplines. So let's look first of all in the next slide at a definition of STEM literacy. Now, one reason that I include this, and I would, well, I'm going to make the point here. Many people say, well, nobody's defined STEM. We don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is. And so if you get nothing else from the webinar today, here's the definition. I will put forward this definition. You don't have to accept all of it, but please don't say nobody's defined it. Here's key categories that I would include in a definition of STEM, and some of the types of things that you already identified among the purposes. First of all, the knowledge, attitude, skills, so what should students know, value, and do, to identify questions and problem situations to explain the natural and designed world, and to draw evidence-based conclusions from this about the STEM-related issues. So knowledge, attitude, skills relative to situations future citizens are going to confront. Do I have to bring up? I don't. Everybody is probably already thinking of, oh, COVID-19, what knowledge do we need, what attitudes, and what skills do we need to identify that problem, to think about it, explain what has to be done or is being done in natural and designed world, and draw conclusions. Next. To understand the characteristic features of STEM disciplines, how do they relate to human knowledge, inquiry, design, and so on? So understanding what the disciplines of science, technology, engineering, and math do and don't do. What knowledge can they provide and what knowledge would they not provide? What are the processes of inquiry? What are the processes of design or problem solving that they present that are different from other disciplines that we may be interested in or know about in schools and so on? Next. Now, this, if you think about any number of times that you've heard Dr. Anthony Fauci talking about COVID-19, you get an idea that the STEM disciplines behind the emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases do have an effect on the material, intellectual, cultural environments that we live in. How aware are our citizens of that fact? And what is the consequence, good and bad, and so on? So that's one dimension that extends beyond just a knowledge base about viruses and so on. Next. Very importantly, a willingness to engage. And for those of you who are reviewing this morning and going over, I was going, oh, there's the word engage. This isn't a play on words about the 5E instructional model. This dimension is a willingness to engage in STEM-related issues and with the ideas of science, technology, mathematics, engineering, as constructive, concerned, and reflective citizens. So the willingness to engage becomes, at least in my mind, a really important issue, because you can't be dismissive of what, for example, COVID-19 is doing and the effect that it has had on our society. So I think COVID-19 becomes a fairly good, if not a very good, way to think about this literacy, because STEM literacy, literally using COVID, and by the way, you could extend this to other categories: natural hazards, severe weather, the fires, that it isn't just the COVID-19. As I went through this, I think COVID-19 becomes a particularly good example of all of the categories we're talking about. And it is a life situation that literally all of us are dealing with on a daily basis. The next slide. So here are a number of categories. Oh, looky there. Health maintenance and disease prevention. Imagine that. If go ahead and click the others on there. So there's COVID. We also hear about energy efficiency, environmental quality, natural hazards, natural resource use, and understanding the basic disciplines of kind of frontiers of science and technology, engineering, and math. One of the things that I would argue for these categories is, first of all, you'll notice that like environmental quality, natural hazards relate to a number of different things of specific topics and ideas and projects and problems that you could have students study. They are categories that will be with us for a very long time, forever. They are not topics that I could have easily gone through and said climate change, COVID-19, forest fires, seafloor or sea level change, and so on. Those are important temporary, but they're in these categories. So to maintain some political strength, using categories like this and then translating to the particular topics that some of you mentioned earlier in the discussion that's the main point here, okay? Of what topics, what are the categories that you might think about as you are looking for local problems, local projects for students, and appropriate for different grade levels, ages of students, and the abilities and developmental levels of students, and so on. So the next slide. 21st century skills. Let's start with adaptability. Where I came up with these, by the way, these are summary statements from, actually there were 2 or 3 reports that the National Research Council completed, where we brought together people from the business and industry community, people from STEM disciplines, labor economists, and so on, and challenge them to think of what are the categories, what are the skills that workers will need now and most likely in future years. The first on the list, Ken, is adaptability. The ability of the individual to either cope or cope with new ideas, changes, and so on, and change to accommodate what needs to be done, what needs to be accomplished. So that's adaptability. Complex communication becomes the ability to express oneself and the right selection of words, of phrases, and to know how to structure, like, I want to make 3 points today. It's first and second and third. So you're communicating effectively, and being able to like design PowerPoints or something of that sort. Yeah, complex communication. Well, here's the idea, and we hear about it kind of every day on television now. Not a criticism, but there's some very complex ideas that are being discussed relative to COVID, relative to a number of other topics that are contemporary issues. How clearly are those communicated? And that challenge is up to all of us to be clear. Next is non-routine problem solving. There are numbers of issues that, or problems that our students will confront, that our citizens are confronting, that aren't the everyday problems. I could mention COVID-19 again. We haven't seen it. Here's a whole new set of situations. And using, from a teaching, from the classroom point of view, being able to develop for the students, how would experts think about this? What would you do? What are the practices in mathematics, in science, in technology and engineering that individuals might use to understand and solve the various problems that we confront? Next is a particularly, next category, Ken. There, okay, self-management, self-development. Those of us who work at home and those of us who have had to begin working at home in the last 3 months or so, understand from the business point of view, can you manage your time? Can you figure out problems and develop new ideas and so on, that you're home alone? Now, we certainly can Google, find information, but that's part of the self-management, working at home. The final category, systems thinking, is actually, it's a personal favorite of mine, because I would argue, and I would be very interested to hear what many of you have to say about what I'm going to say now. Systems thinking is one category that we can teach, and we have every right to teach it within the STEM disciplines. So if individuals come away from kindergarten through 12th grade, or undergraduate programs for that matter, and they're able to say, oh, just a second, the boundaries of this system are thus and so, whatever the boundaries might be. The components of the system are identifiable. The flow of resources within the system looks like this, and especially into the system and out of the system. And the feedback mechanisms in the system are constituted as thus and so. That would help immensely, I think, for future citizens being able to identify, work with problems, understand what's possible, not possible, and so on. I would argue very strongly that we include systems thinking in our classes as appropriate, and so on. Now, before I move on to the next slide here, let me also note, for 21st century skills such as these, we have an opportunity every time we do, and some of the participants use hands-on, active learning, doing investigations. To the degree that we engage the students in those kinds of activities and experiences, we have every opportunity to underscore and introduce the idea that adaptability is something the students have to do within the context of that activity. And communication is one of the practices, and a clear and direct connection to language arts. Problem solving, primarily think of technology and engineering, but we have an opportunity to do that in our classrooms, in our activities. Self-management, the students working in groups have both the understanding other people's ideas, managing my time, and going and finding other information, and so on. So the self-management is there, and likewise, with a little bit of understanding and coaching, I think students could go, well, what's the system we're working with? And what are the boundaries of that system, components, feedback, etc. So all of this is, instead of looking at this as a whole new category, we have a whole new curriculum, the opportunities, the potential to address these within our current programs, to the degree we're using, whether you call it hands-on, activity-based, and so on, we have the opportunity by using those approaches. And finally, the next slide, Ken. The focus on STEM careers, we need to provide opportunities and increase the number and underscore the diversity of students in STEM professions. And I understand Oki Lee is giving one of the seminars. Oki is your expert to address this kind of issue, basically of equity, diversity, and so on. but we need to pay very close attention in this day and age to increasing the numbers and doing what we can to introduce individuals to what STEM careers may be like. And I would say also what they need to know and be able to do to enter in and go on and pursue a STEM career. The final bullet here, we need to recruit and we need to retain individuals in STEM careers and have them go into the careers with a full understanding of what the challenges are, what the career is like, and stay in the career and stay with it for their career. Little play on words there. Now, the next thing that I would have, let's go back to our breakout rooms and spend 5 minutes and take that time and discuss what you see as the primary challenges and contemporary opportunities to achieve the 3 goals of STEM education. You may use some of the context that you identified in your earlier discussions in the breakout room, or address specifically the 3 that I have identified: STEM literacy, workforce skills, careers in the 21st century. Okay, let's go to the breakout rooms.
Okay, Roger, I'm going to set them up here. Let's see, we are going to have same rooms. Here we go.
excellent discussions. Let me,
Dr. Bybee, why don't you hold on? We still have 100. We're getting
Oh,
close to everybody coming back.
okay, sure.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
I participated in one group, and then the individuals, if I were to summarize, did an excellent job of understanding challenges such as time. Where do you find the time to do this? You know, incorporate STEM. What are the resources that are available? Is there funding for the resources? And also just the whole business of how do the students learn to apply and make connections to other disciplines. I think those are key challenges, not to be dismissed. I'll try and come back to those in the discussion that follows. But I would like to hear from one or two of the other breakout groups what you identified as challenges different from the list that the group I participated in, and then also what are the opportunities? The group that I did participate in identified some key opportunities. Let's hear from some other groups though.
Dr. Bybee, we have a participant, Morgan Zielinski. You want to talk?
Yes, hi. In our group, we were discussing the challenges, particularly in elementary school. And the biggest challenge we identified was simply determining a realistic starting place for teachers in elementary school. You know, they're bogged down by all 5 subjects typically all day, and just selecting something that they can logistically attempt in an hour, maybe once a week or something like that, rather than looking at an entire curriculum document, being overwhelmed. How am I going to prep these materials? How will I prepare for this type of activity, let alone what the activity is? And then you have to consider the skills of an elementary student, you know, collecting materials to get ready for the activity. Those were the challenges we identified and discussed the most.
Excellent. Let me anticipate, or so I don't forget it until the end. We do have available for your use the design. It's an article that I wrote for Science and Children that at least addresses some of the issues that you just brought up, Morgan. And we'll make that available to you. It's at the end of this webinar. And it is, I hope anyway, a realistic place to begin, which is, I think, one of the first phrases that you use. So,
Roger, we have about 13 minutes left.
Yep.
Just in terms of pacing.
Yeah. So
and once again, we have great comments coming through the chat.
Yeah, okay, Pam.
Just opportunities, student perseverance, you know, looking at, you know, productive struggle and how important that is. And then some of the challenges, you know, limited hands-on opportunities, you know, time constraints, things like that. So lots of good ideas in the chat again.
Yeah. And those are, so look, doing the kinds of things that we are interested in, there are challenges and there are opportunities, and compliments to the participants. You identified some key challenges and key opportunities. If we're to go forward, Ken, if you would go to the next slide, let me identify some priorities that can initiate the work. First priority, focus on the instructional core. And it's clarified here in terms of, in the lower left corner that you see is the content and the practices or the processes of science, technology, engineering, math, and so on. In many cases, your state standards have changed, and that would be one place I would suggest go to look to see what is there that is appropriate and usable as the content and the practice for a unit, a project, a problem-based situation, and so on. That's already there, and the respective states represented here, Arizona, Texas, Alabama, down the list. So you can begin there, and those are probably also generally designated for the age and grade levels that you're addressing and you're interested in. So the other two categories, the top category, increase students' active learning of STEM content and practices. That's a curriculum and instruction kind of view. And it is connected to the lower right, the professional development. We need to increase the teacher's skills and knowledge that they bring to teaching STEM. So what do they know about, what should they know to be applying through the curriculum and so on, about the nature of science, the nature of technology, engineering, mathematics, and so on. It's also the case that many of the state standards, one of the reasons that I make this point, many of the state standards have, if you're looking at the science standards and they are related to and build upon the next generation science standards, they probably have something about connections to mathematics, connections to engineering / technology. And if they're science standards, there's an obvious connection there. So stay focused here. That's a first priority. Second priority is, in most cases, individuals will have to firstly either select, adapt, or develop curriculum models. So think of small, short units. In part, this can address the issue of time. I'm not recommending or arguing that you change the whole curriculum. So find a core idea, a project that the students can engage in at the beginning of the year so they understand the STEM disciplines, or as a capstone project. And then where do you identify either to select, adapt, or develop those instructional units that may be appropriately used in the activity or the project that you identify. Be sure they include the core concepts from the state standards. That's back to that connection. That it provides a coherent framework for your curriculum. How do you get from point A to point B? And also, how do you get, that's in a course, for example, or a grade level. But also, how do you get from kindergarten, first grade to 10th, 11th, 12th grade? How is the curriculum coherent across that time frame? And then STEM practices as features of the program. Practices, in this case, I'm using the term practice in the same way that one would talk about the practices of science, designing investigations, using data as the basis or an evidence as a basis for an argument, and so on. And then facilitating 21st century skills, I gave examples of that a little bit ago. Of if you're doing a hands-on activity, I think that is kind of right there. It is the opportunity is presented to you. Next priority is to, whether it's lobbying, what it takes is to support the professional development of STEM teachers. Professional learning communities, talking to administrators to say, that we really want to do this, and we need the opportunity to get teachers together. And as was just mentioned, I think it was Morgan, how do we do this? Where do we begin? Do it within the context of a professional development opportunity. I just really encourage that. And now see if you can't use online communities to begin forming groups of participants working on various projects. Third, no, you go to the fourth. This is one of the problems we have had for years in education. I'm not going to elaborate, but it's like, explain to the public. Don't just talk to your colleagues. You need to do that, but also we need to go beyond and explain to the public what STEM education is and why it will benefit their children and the nation. The workforce skills, understanding contemporary issues like COVID, all of those things are related, and to the degree you can do that with other topics and other parts of your program will be of benefit to you. And the final priority, we've had, whatever it is, numbers of individuals participating in this webinar today. Almost by definition of your participation, your interest, your location within school districts, I am very comfortable saying you represent leaders who can go a little bit at a time, keep it simple, get started, and start moving into the types of things we're saying. My recommendation, be clear about the goals. We've talked about some of those. Make the connections to the state standards so you have that as an opportunity and something that individuals will have to do anyway. Next, and you implement the instructional materials that represent STEM. And finally, support the professional learning of your colleagues and your own professional learning. Let me just conclude by saying there's a real need these days to make sure that the students learn what it means to engage in civil discourse, to listen to others, to try and understand the other person's position, to not argue and contradict and interrupt and talk over, but to recognize what it means to have civil discourse within the science classroom around the types of topics that you're interested in and you're engaging in. So there are two handouts I'm going to mention here in the final minute or so. First of all, I made available from an article that I did for Science and Children on using the 5E instructional model to introduce the STEM disciplines. So back to the where do we find the time and so on, that is a very real issue. To the degree that as a classroom teacher at whatever grade level, you're introducing at the beginning of the year something about, well, here's the quote, the scientific method or whatever. Take the article that we're making available to you, and what it does is it says, let's introduce the STEM disciplines. What is science? How do we think about science? What is technology, engineering, mathematics? And through an activity, a contextual activity, give the opportunity to define those disciplines. The second, think of it as a handout. The second article that you can download is kind of an overview and an introduction to the 21st century skills. And I really encourage you to go and get that, take it home, talk to your colleagues, and see if you can come up with something to make a small step positive first step in implementing the kinds of things you've identified and I've identified in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bybee. That was wonderful. You shared a lot of relevant insights about education. You are a legend. You have provided so much depth and research and information and inspiration to all of us. On behalf of all the participants, thank you for joining us today to sharing your perspectives on education. We greatly appreciate you. To follow up, we will now post a link in the chat room for a certificate of participation for you. You must click on the link so you can download the certificate. Again, look for the link in the chat window. We will also post a short 5-question survey about this webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on the mini-STEMposium.com website in the next day or two. A follow-up email from me will have a link to the handout from today's webinar. Please remember that we have 5 additional webinars this week and a set of 6 sessions in July. You are welcome to go online and register for those. On behalf of Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes, we appreciate you taking time to participate in these learning experiences. Thank you and be safe.